Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The sprint race in Imola is over. Verstappen will take pole position for tomorrow's race in the Imola Grand Prix, but Lewis Hamilton, the Mercedes, very difficult afternoon for them, effectively admitting defeat for this year's championship already, just 4 races in. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Lots to talk about today. Firstly, free practice 2 was earlier in the day, always weird really, you've got qualifying already done and dusted, then out for a free practice session. That probably puts less weight on the results of this session, just because some teams are going for, pure pace, Mercedes trying to unlock something, whereas the other cars are just trying to really prepare for the race, right, and do race stints, this type of stuff. So always difficult really to read into the numbers here, but in fairness, Mercedes actually did top this session, which is kind of a strange one when we look at the overall standings. Actually a really tough session for for the McLarens. Riccardo didn't even get it at the garage. Norris, he had a pretty tough time as well, and then Valtteri Bottas, he didn't get out of the garage either, right? So it was kind of interesting how these cars actually performed very well in the sprint race. We'll see here in a second. But yeah, George Russell topping a session. I think that's the first time the Mercedes have topped a session since I'm guessing maybe Barcelona. They topped some of the sessions in testing right before the season even began. Since then, there's been nothing for Mercedes, right? But they looked slightly more promising in this session than they had done before. But on the soft tyres, of course, somewhere on the mediums, it was a bit of a strange one. Of course, the sprint really gives you a decent idea of where the pace was at, but generally pretty tough to overtake around this circuit. We did see some good overtaking though, but largely because, of course, the way the grid was organised from qualifying yesterday was a bit of a mess, right? We had a lot of cars further back than they should have been and able to make some good progress, but not all the case all the way down the field, as we shall see. So let's have it in the sprint race. Of course, look, the whole sprint race as a concept is an interesting one. There was a lot of talk about it today actually, because generally so far, the sprint races that we saw last year weren't particularly great. Generally a procession. I think that's what George Russell said actually. It felt like, at least where they were in the field, pretty much just a procession from start to finish. Not a long enough race, right, with not enough strategy implications in tyre changes, pit stops to actually do anything interesting. Just get effectively stuck as they did in a DRS train behind Sebastian Vettel it ended up. But on the front end there was certainly some entertaining stuff going on. But whether this is actually a good idea for F1, I'm not really sure. There were certainly interesting battles at the front here, but it also means that look at this grid. We've got Norris P3, Magnussen P4, and we kind of lose that largely because there is a sprint race, right? It allows teams that kind of lacked off in qualifying, or allows drivers individually, right, that have good cars that had a tough time in qualifying to catch up and overtake. Meaning that the grid we have tomorrow is largely much less interesting than what it was today. So arguably unfortunate circumstances, but again, you can certainly go back and forth on the sprint, because it was an entertaining affair, briefly. There were some good overtakes and stuff, especially towards the ends, but largely it's nowhere near as interesting as the real race. So I'm still not sold on sprint races personally. You guys might disagree, but anyway, Leclerc gets a fantastic start. Verstappen basically stalls off the line, and Leclerc goes shooting past him, and then immediately a yellow flag comes up. The safety car comes through. It's actually guanyu that was off the track. Pierre Gasly, there was contact there right at the back of the pack. Zhou goes off. Safety car comes through. By the time lap 5 or so, we're getting back under running. It's Carlos Sainz making a run through the field. So he bounced back today, had certainly a good start, moved all the way up through the pack. Perez also in a similar boat as well. All some cars though had a much harder time moving up. That was none other than, of course, the Mercedes we'll dive into here in a second. Now, Magnussen had a tough time. I think there were some drivers that started on the mediums. Most drivers thought, okay, let's try the softs and get to the end on the softs. We haven't really seen what the kind of long run pace is on the softs for a lot of these cars. We saw, of course, last time out in Australia, where it seemed like the Red Bull had pretty bad degradation compared to the Ferrari on the medium and hard tyres, whereas maybe on the softs we don't really know what's happening, right? So in the sprint race it could be a different story, and tomorrow in the race it could be a different story again, because from what we've seen so far, the degradation that Mercedes and Ferrari suffer is less than Red Bull on these on those compounds, but on the softs it seems to be a different story. So it's really tough to say how well this indicates what tomorrow's race is going to be, which does mean that there's some excitement, right? Because if this was exactly how the race goes tomorrow, then Verstappen's just going to win because he's got more pace. But it does come down to tyre degradation, as Leclerc certainly found out. So halfway through, Vettel had dropped back a few places, and I think it was P7, P8 or something. He got overtaken a couple of times. But Vettel was Schumacher right behind Vettel. And there was effectively a DRS train going on. The Mercedes could do nothing about it because they couldn't get past Schumacher because he was behind Vettel and got DRS from him. They obviously don't have the straight line speed to overtake on their own, so they just got stuck there. And it was they lost a couple of places actually on the start anyway, and they really couldn't regain any of them. Eventually, I think Russell gets past Vettel right on the line, effectively the last couple of laps or so. But that's because Schumacher gets through, and then eventually Russell gets through on Vettel as well. But there wasn't enough time for Hamilton to make him any more places because the race was kind of just too short for them to make any moves happen, right? So difficult situation for both Mercedes. And well, anyway, as towards the end of the race, Verstappen, I think basically was biding his time. It was impressive because it looked like he was dropping back a bit. It was 1.7 seconds behind at the points, but I think he kind of knew that if he looks after his tyres a bit better than Leclerc, hopes Leclerc's tyres fall off a bit because the soft tyres for 21 laps is certainly going to be a push. It made sense for a lot of the teams to do that because they got much better pace off the start. That's kind of why Magnussen suffered, you could well argue. At this point, Verstappen closed in massively, kind of reminiscent in a way actually of what we saw in Saudi Arabia, and eventually makes a stunning pass around the outside. Like DRS passes can be entertaining when they're kind of necessary, if you know what I mean. Like at a track like this, if there's no DRS, you're not making the pass. But if there is, then you can make passes like this. At Saudi Arabia though, it's kind of like DRS is too good because the pass is just too easy. You just drive past him on the straight with a faster car. In this case, it made for a very entertaining pass. So these two always at it, right? Every single race, there's been some sort of battle between these two. Seems like Leclerc's tyres were falling off massively though, because as soon as Verstappen overtook, Leclerc was like 2 seconds behind him within a lap. So definitely seemed like the degradation that they suffered in this race, the Ferrari, much more than they've suffered really on any other tyre compounds so far this season. But pretty rare you get a 20-odd lap race where you have to run the softs for the entire thing. So as Max Verstappen says, it was fast, pushing quite a bit towards the ends. I think we were a bit better on our tyres at the end of the race. That certainly seemed to be the case. And as Charles says as well, we struggle with the tyres at the ends. Need to analyse that for tomorrow. The thing is, they're unlikely to be, well, they could be running softs, I guess, tomorrow. It depends how things go. Like rain, safety cars always play a factor in consideration here. But medium tyres, hard tyres, or whatever they decide to use for the 63-odd lap race or whatever it is going to be a different story, right? And we saw in Australia, the Ferrari was much better on those tyres, it seems, than the Red Bull was. So it could be a different story tomorrow. And even at the end of the race, I think that Perez was closing in pretty rapidly as well. And he had a great race also based on where he started, right? So it definitely goes to show that the Red Bull on those soft tyres had much better degradation, like, compared to the Ferrari. And maybe partly that was due to the fact that they've lost a bit of weight. Like, I think they've lost 10 kilos or so. So it's an interesting one, no doubt. Now, also this from Perez, as he says, managed to recover. Great position for tomorrow. That's kind of the thing about the sprint races in general. Perez and Sainz got bad qualifying sessions yesterday, and they just effectively got to just recover in their quicker car and get up to where, the car kind of should be. So makes for maybe a less interesting kind of a grid tomorrow based on what it could have been with Norris and Magnussen up there. But, it is what it is at the end of the day. And it seems like Magnussen and Haas realised, the soft tire probably wasn't the right one for this race. We gave it a go. Some teams, though, the likes of Mercedes, are certainly going to have to try something different tomorrow on strategy if they want to make a run, because they're going to have to do something different, whether it's starting on the softs, the mediums, like the hards, whatever, going for really long stints. Like Mercedes are going to have to try something else tomorrow to actually get up through the field, because they obviously were struggling to overtake today. And if they get stuck in a kind of a similar DRS train as they did today, then they're going to be absolutely, dead and buried, to be honest, for tomorrow, right? And they've got to pick up some sort of points, because lots of points on offer this weekend. These guys pick up all 8, so Verstappen gets 8 points, Leclerc gets 7 points, so slightly closing that gap, I guess, in terms of the championship lead, but really that shall come down to tomorrow. Both McLarens, though, P5, P6, impressive work for them so far this weekend. Like, just how they've turned their season around since the start of the year. It almost seems like they and Mercedes have kind of swapped cars this weekend especially. This is the overall classification. Hamilton P14, George Russell P11. As I say, like, the race wasn't really long enough, and, they kind of got stuck behind him. Tough time for the Mercedes. But, their actual placings here are worse than they were before the sprint race, right? In theory, the sprint race gave them a chance to recover. Didn't happen at all. Nowhere near enough straight line speed. But some familiar names up top. So Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Sainz is the top 4. Sainz did a very good recovery drive, as did Perez, to get into a good position. But, it kind of makes the top 10 a little bit less spicy than maybe it could have been. But, yeah, still some decent cars here that Mercedes will try and get through. Not going to be so easy, though. Strategy might have to be a consideration for them. Just to mention this also, based on the sprint race, we actually have Sainz now up into P2 in the constructors, or in the drivers, sorry, just ahead of Russell, because, of course, he actually picked up some points here. Verstappen leapfrogs Hamilton as well. And now in terms of team standings, it's Red Bull that actually takes second place from Mercedes just as a result of that sprint, right? So, like, Mercedes 80 points here would have been good enough to kind of hold on to that, but they probably wouldn't have held on to it after the race anyway. Who knows what McLaren can do to Mercedes' advantage on them this year, because, who knows if it's going to be Mercedes versus McLaren for P4 as opposed to them fighting the top. That certainly seems to be what they're thinking at the present time, because they said yesterday, like, their car pretty much in terms of midfield pace, very much in the midfield. Like, they reckon that the kind of tyre warm-up on their car is way less than what the other teams have. Like, it's really difficult for them to get a good lap in, which is obviously really hurting them, right? Because on a lap like this, on a track like this, where overtaking is tough, you can't afford to, like, just come in and have a bad qualifying and recover in the race. You can probably do that if you're in a Ferrari or a Red Bull, but, if you're a Mercedes, you certainly can't afford to, right? So that leaves you in a very difficult position. And the race pace should be better, but in a sprint like this, as like with the way the track was kind of working out, with not too many laps on board, give them another 10 laps, they probably would have, maybe both made top 10, or, whatever it might have been, because, where was falling off, and pit stops and all this type of stuff can change into the consideration, but not good enough on this instance. And this is what Hamilton has to say in an interview, right? Like, he's saying, look, we straight up haven't got it right this year. Everyone's working hard. I show a brief clip from this, actually, where he basically says towards the end, like, look, we're not fighting for championships. We're going to do our best. We're basically just fighting the car to try and actually understand the thing, and to just trying to do their best going forward. So, yeah, like, that's their focus right now, is effectively just battling in the midfield and trying to get some points from this weekend, as opposed to actually even thinking about the championship. So, yeah, obviously, he's not fighting for the championship, and neither is as the team.
We stick together, we try to motivate everyone, and this is the situation that we are faced with, but everyone's got their heads down, everyone's working as hard as they can. We're obviously not fighting for this championship, but we're fighting to understand the car and improve and progress through the year. That's all we can hope for right now.
It's a really tough time for Hamilton, obviously, like after the way last year ended, right, was kind of hoping to come in here with a, better car, you could actually compete at the top, and people expected kind of around this time Mercedes might have turned it around, and if anything, their results this weekend, well, obviously, based on the pure numbers, have been way worse than what they have so far this year, so who knows what will happen in the race tomorrow. Everything can still change. Certainly, Verstappen on pole now for two more, he's been on pole 2 sprint races in the past, Monza last year, and also Silverstone. Both of those races he didn't finish, and I think Hamilton, Hamilton won the Silverstone race, of course, and it was Daniel Ricciardo that won the Monza one, I guess, last year, right? So certainly all can still change, but it doesn't look like Mercedes are particularly going anywhere right now, and Hamilton effectively saying, it's, we can't even really think about it, right? And Verstappen said not too long ago they're going to need 45 races to catch up. Maybe his mind's changing on that based on at least the sprint race today, which definitely shows that, as long as reliability isn't too much of a factor this year, we should have a good championship battle on our hands once again. This is also from Brundle, right, just talking about the sprint race, he reckons he's drop out of sprint race for a free practice session every single day of the week. So in theory, it creates more viewership, more interest, right? Having something interesting to watch in every day, quality sprint race. The main race on the Sunday, I think next year there's rumours they want to do 6 sprint races instead of 3, but I'm personally not sold yet at all. Definitely intrigued to get a perspective on it. And I'm just another example here, right, of Sainz and Perez, kind of messed up their qualifying, and then they get bailed out by the sprint race, you could argue, in this particular case. And Verstappen also kind of made his thoughts known on that we looked at very briefly yesterday. And just this actually from F1 Stats Guru to finish off with, the last 3 times there was a sprint race last season, 2 of those times Hamilton won it, 1 of those times Ricciardo won it. Doubt either of those things is happening today, but both times Verstappen has been on pole in a sprint race, he's failed to win the race. Can he change that tomorrow? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.